Good morning, everyone. How is everyone doing? Hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to Passion, Purpose, and Possibilities. I am your money mindset, dream big coach and podcast host, Kenny Ingersoll. Thank you for joining us today. As always, thank you to Ingersoll Enterprises for sponsoring today's episode. Sorry. So, please go check it out. A lot of great things going on. I know Christmas is coming up pretty soon. A lot of great events, great activities going on. Please go check it out. IngersollEnterprises.com/events. IngersollEnterprises.com/events. So today we have a special guest back on the show. It's been a minute because we've just been crazy busy and hectic and doing awesome stuff. But without further ado, let's bring on Dalton Jensen.
Hey, Kenny, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Doing well. How you doing, Dalton?
I'm doing well, brother. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Now, it's been a minute since we've been on each other's show, so let's start with that. What are you up to? What's going on with Dalton?
Yeah, for sure, man. Kind of same old since we last met, still doing sales coaching and training. I'm the head of sales for a franchise company, Dirty Dough. So it's been really fun, man. But other than that, just, finishing up school and getting after it, boss.
Awesome. So with all of that, how do you keep the fire, the motivation, the fuel for going with all of that?
Yeah, man, it can get really busy. I guess the easiest way is just what I've talked about, like when I do my, when I talk to salespeople or when I talk to like my team about, just staying motivated in general, because motivation's just kind of funky. It's just kind of a funky thing, right? Like a lot of people think it has a lot to do with, for example, it has a lot to do with, watching like motivational videos or like having like pictures on your phone or something like that. But for me, and what I tell like my team is motivation comes from like consistently doing the things that keep us on track to hit goals, right? Like it's about habits. And so when I talk about goal setting just in general and how to stay motivated to like hit goals, I don't really focus on goals. I focus on the habits that will make us the person who is eligible to hit those goals, right? Like, for example, if I have a teammate or if I have a sales consultant who wants to hit a certain number of sales, then when we reverse engineer those goals, like how many calls do I need to make, what's my outreach need to look like, the training we need to do every day. When we do things like that, that's what you need to do every day in order to hit your goals. And how do you stay motivated to like keep on the habits? Well, that's the funny thing about habits. They turn into just like these it's just repetitions, right? Like sometimes it's okay to go through the motions if you're trying to keep, your habits right on point. So that's what we go over. That's how I stay motivated, is I just make sure that every day we do the same thing. We train every day. We make the phone calls no matter what. And eventually they just turn into a habit. Eventually it just feels weird when I don't do it. And so that's where, the good things come to.
Yeah, and I can definitely attest to the feeling weird when you're not doing it. And that's how the shows become for me. It's like, what? Especially when I go out of town and maybe not do a live episode that week. It's like, wait, aren't I supposed to be doing something?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so, when you don't do it, it feels weird, but then, like why you're supposed to be doing it in the first place. And so it just keeps you going. So that's the good part for sure.
I love that, the why, and a lot of the pictures and motivational videos, they talk about a little bit, there's a why, if you have this goal, why do you want that goal? Why does Dalton have this goal on his podcast? Or why does Dalton have this goal at Dirty Dough? What's the deeper meaning? Because a lot of times just doing the thing isn't enough of motivation. And often, many times, money isn't either the main goal or the main driver behind the goal. So I like how you brought up the why. And that's one of the reasons why I do this show, because it helps me grow, but it's also giving an example to my son. That's a bigger why for me than if you were to pay me $1 million an episode kind of thing. So I love how you brought up the why and how it helps create those habits and remind us why we started in the first place, or remind us when we're going through the motions and the crap, why we continue to do it, why we continue to push through the crap.
Yeah. I mean, why is just a funny thing. It's just different for everybody, and it's funny too because not only is it different for everybody, but it's really hard to pinpoint for a lot of people. So that's why a lot of my message too. I definitely think it's important, like you said, but I think it's also equally as important as just to get started, and then you can figure that stuff out as you go. Like if it's something you really want to do, you can pivot and go from there. But it's really nice to go that way.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we could go into the whole other subject of I don't have the all the excuses and imposter syndrome and all that fun stuff. So how do you help like your guests on your podcast, with what they're stuck with getting why, or what's one of the driving factors? Why did Dalton start his podcast?
Yeah. So I heard two questions. I can help answer the first one of like, my why, but also like how to find a why. For me, why is really simple. Like, I don't subscribe to like some of the cliches, but for me, why is about getting better every day, right? And why, like, is my definition of success. Like if I can look back to last week or last month or last year and be like, yeah, I've really grown, like either in my career or my knowledge or something like that. Like that's a big deal for me. Like knowing how to grow and knowing how, like, next, like my next steps. Because if you can line all of that out, then you really have a great opportunity to like come forward, right? So my why is why I do things and why I keep doing things. It is to prove to myself, like it's all an internal game for me, like to prove to myself that I can do certain things and that I can overcome certain things, and that if I can do this, then we can find other people who are similar to me, right? Because there's that old expression that like you're unique and special just like everybody else. And for me, if I can do it, then I can help somebody else do it who's very similar to me. And I do believe that if I can do it, there's a lot of people out there who can, right? But the difference with that and why, and so I kind of want to go on a little bit of a tangent because, that's a pretty, at face value, saying like, if I can do it, anybody can do it, seems like a pretty unempathetic statement because we all don't have the same issues. We all haven't worn the same shoes. We all haven't gone down the same path, right? But the caveat with all of that is success looks different for everybody. Like it doesn't look the same for me, for you. So if I want to help somebody do the things that I've done, we also have to understand that success is going to look different for them, and whatever that means. And so I help people dive into like figuring out what success looks like for them in this situation. So like if you were going to start a podcast, right? I mean, you already have one, but if I was talking to somebody who didn't, like if you were going to start a podcast, what would you have to what would you have to say to yourself, see for it to be like, hey, this was actually really good? Um, and then we kind of even go further because all of like the material things or like the meta stuff, like listening, like listeners or downloads, that might not be the real case, right? It might be your network. Like for me, I have quite a few listeners and I have quite a few downloads and I've accomplished a lot of things. But if all of that went away and I never had anything, I think the biggest part of my podcast would be networking. And so it's really fun like that way. And I really enjoy like the networking aspect that my podcast has brought me.
Absolutely. And there's a question in the chat, and I think you answered it pretty well. Someone was asking, what did you do? Was great. And you said, success looks different to everyone, and what you do or what you define as success may not be everyone's cup of tea or may not look the same. For example, our podcasts, your aspect of success might be a little different than mine on whatever, and it doesn't mean that one's better than the other or anything like that. And and it's certainly not a comparison in that rate. And I think along the lines of, if you can do it, I can do it. I don't think it's necessarily meant to be applied to doing the exact same thing the exact same way. I think it's doing the same thing, but to your definition of success.
Yeah, so exactly.
I like how you address that.
Yeah, like I came from a town I grew up in a town that was really excuse me. I came from a town that came from a lot of poverty. Like we had a lot of poverty in our town, and so not a lot of people really got out, or they ended up just going the same route of the town. And by the way, I want to because some people from my hometown listen to this stuff. I have nothing against my hometown. I think it's amazing. Like I was really blessed to be there because it helped me realize a lot of things. And there's also nothing wrong with people wanting to, stay in the same town and do the same jobs. Like it's a beautiful thing. And by the way, like I'm from the Midwest, like that's the backbone of America. Like if somebody doesn't do those jobs, all of us in the big cities don't get to do a lot of the things that we enjoy. Like people don't realize, excuse me, people don't realize that a lot of what we have in the main world, or in the Midwest is the main world, but a lot of things we have like in the big cities or in like these things that we take for granted come from the Midwest, right? And so but I just really enjoyed growing up there because it opened my eyes. I think you get an opportunity to see people progress differently. But for me, like in my hometown, it was important for me to go back and start something so that people could like either improve the town if they didn't want to leave, or realize that like just that town that they lived in wasn't the whole world, right? Because people get caught up in that, right? Like we get blinders on, like this must be the only thing, and it's not. And you just need somebody who came from where you were to do the things that you've done, and that's what this is all about, right? So like in my childhood, it was really weird. Like I was like grew up in a Polynesian house, so we had this opportunity to like grow in the town. I wasn't like originally from Iowa, but I had moved there really young. And so I kind of claim it like born and raised in Iowa. And anyway, it was just really fun. Like going back to just tell people like, hey, there are opportunities outside of what you're seeing right now is really big. It is a really big opportunity. And so that's what I love about all of this.
Yeah. And it applies, I think it was such a great segue. It applies so much into business. You can apply that to getting mentorship. Where I'm at, I know, let's say this much about my field right now. But when you have that mentorship, they have a bigger aspect. They've been outside the city, so to speak, to relate back to what you were just talking about. So I think it's
right. Yeah.
I think it's a awesome analogy for
Yeah.
mentorship and business and life and whatever field you want mentorship, or whatever field you need help in,
Yeah.
and getting that, being around those people that have done that, have seen more, like you said, when you went back and people like, oh, how was this? What was that? Tell me about this place. Or, I just went on a cruise to Alaska a few months ago, and everyone's like, let me see some pictures and tell me about this and all that sort of stuff,
Yeah.
So we really do get blinders on in so many different aspects of life. And one of those blinders is thinking that we need to know it all, or thinking that we do know it all, or that we don't need a mentor. Mentor is for someone who doesn't know it all, or asking for help.
Yeah.
It's that pride of not wanting to ask for help or stop for directions.
Well, I think mentorship is just a funny word anyway. Like, a lot of my mentors don't even know that they're my mentors, to be honest with you, right? Like, a lot of my mentors come from books. A lot of my mentors come from like people that I follow, like on social media. So like authors, like the kind of some kind of influencers every once in a while. And by the way, like that's okay too. Like if you want to go find a mentor, like find a mentor or whatever. But a lot of the people that I call my mentors, I wouldn't have called my mentors at the time of what was that, whatever was happening. Like I was in the car business. I had a GM who taught me a ton about sales. And it wasn't until afterwards, when I'm going through and studying that again, that I was like, oh yeah, he was a mentor for me. Right. So like, I feel like people get caught up in definitions, when really, like, in this case, sure, go, find a mentor or whatever. But I always think it's very awkward when people are like, I'm looking for a mentor, somebody help me. And it's like, well, that's in my experience, that's never how it's worked for me.
Yeah, and every approach is different. It's like, I want a car. Okay, that narrows it right down. So
Yeah.
so, but just admitting that you need a mentor of some sort, or that you are humble enough to want that help. Because I'm the same way, in the respect that I get a lot of mentorship from my peers, from social media. Even you've
Mhm.
mentored me more than one time and all that stuff. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but just being humble enough to admit that help would be good, whatever aspect that looks like for you. And then, oh, I just lost my train of thought for a second.
All good, man.
but but yeah, then taking advantage of it. And another analogy that you brought up, is you don't think of them as mentors at the time, or you don't
Mhm.
recognize it or see them as mentors. You kind of take advantage of it, or accustomed to it, like running water in your house.
Mhm.
You don't miss it or appreciate it until it's gone, sort of thing, or until you go without. Um,
Yeah.
and
Or
it's
for
it's
me,
so
like,
true. Go
yeah, or
ahead.
for me, like, even when I started using what they were teaching me, and I was like, and then you learn what a mentor is, right? It's somebody who teaches you how to do something so that you can go and execute it, right? Like, that's the other thing, is like a mentor will do you no good if you don't do anything with it. Like, if you're not going to, yeah, if you're not going to like do anything, then it doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. You could have thousands of books just collecting dust, and then do you no good. They'll turn into
Yeah.
paperweights
Yeah.
themselves. And I
Right.
think that's a
Right.
great segue. How do you apply that? How do you take your passion, narrow down your passion, apply the principles from whatever mentorship source looks like for you,
Yeah.
and then turn that into a business, turn that into however you define success. Because like we
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, your goals, let's again use podcasts. Your goals may not be the likes and downloads and follows. Your goals may be something else, and that could be success to you. Whereas to me,
Hmm.
success is over here, for example. So how do you turn that narrow down that passion, turn that into a successful venture business?
Yeah, I think to start with, yeah, how do you turn like your passion into like a successful business? Well, and then to your first question too, like how do you execute, right? Like how do you take what your mentor, like you've written a book and you execute? Well, that's really easy. You just go do it. Like you're always gonna fail the first time. So like for example, when I'm teaching people sales and we're going over maybe like objections or we're going over like questions you need to ask during qualifying, and they're like, well, how do I get really good at this? Well, you just start doing it, whether that's like in a role play or you take your next customer and you're like, all right, I'm going to try this, right? Like, I'm just going to say it and we'll see what happens, because I really firmly believe that no one thing can kill a deal. And so if I'm going to go in there and I'm going to try something new, like I role played it and I'm going to try it fresh with a customer, like end the conversation. It might set me back if I do it wrong, but then I learn, but no one's ever going to really walk away. So I have an opportunity to like come back from that. And so how do you execute it, man? You just do it. And you embrace the suck. You just realize like this might not go the way I think it's going to go the first time, but if I keep going and I keep trying it, then it will work out. Right. So that's the whole idea of like finding whatever you're passionate about and then just start doing it. Right. So how I would execute something I was passionate about is I would just start like building in public, is what they call it, like on Twitter or YouTube. Like you just start putting out what you learn. So here's a good example of like a framework for you. Like I want to learn about finances. So I'm going to go on YouTube and watch 50 hours of videos, just everybody that I can learn finance from. And then while I'm learning that, you take notes. Instead of taking notes on a paper and pen, my notes are going to be on Twitter, or they're going to be on Facebook, or I'm going to take video notes. And that's how I'm going to like solidify what I'm learning, but also like turn my passion into some kind of opportunity to build an audience, right? Or to, turn it into a Q&A or a course or whatever, however you want to do that, right? Like whatever that else, like after you've built an audience. But that's how I would turn like a passion into something that we love to do, right?
Awesome. Then how do you deal with setbacks, hiccups, naysayers, all that sorts of things, self-doubt?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it all is the same, right? Which is really funny, because one of the things I go over with my team, like whenever I'm coaching, or excuse me, like because I've been a manager for a team, like I'm a manager for a sales team right now, and we go over rejection. So your question to me sounds a lot like, how do we handle rejection? Whether that's like rejection from ourselves, rejection from our peers, rejection from the market, right? Like, hey, that's not a good product idea, right? Like, how do you deal with that? Well, you just listen. The truth can't hurt you. The truth won't ever kill you, right? So that's what I try to focus on. Like whenever I receive a piece of criticism or feedback, the first thing I try to look at is I analyze truth. Like what made them say this? And what part is true? And if I can find some truth in there, like, oh yeah, you know what, that I might have messed up here, right? I might have done this wrong. I might have jumped the gun here. Like that'll never hurt me. That can only help me, right? But if I'm dealing with like a naysayer or like a hater, somebody who's like, hey dude, you just suck, period, right? Like I went through this a few months ago and it actually really messed with my head. I posted about this the other day, but like it really messed me up. And I had to take a really good look at like why I was doing what I was doing. But then, so then though, at the end of the day, it was really that he just didn't like me. And there's nothing you can do about that, right? So there's two truths that happen when someone gives you criticism or feedback. Either the truth is they just don't like you and they're just trying to make you mad, right? And then you know that I'm going to set some boundaries and I'm not going to talk to that person or whatever, right? Or something they said was actually true and I need to fix or I need to address. That's true and that helps me. Or they hate me, that's true, then that helps me, right? So either way, easier said than done, right? Like very easier said than done. I just went through this, right? It took me like 3 months to like really work through all of this stuff. But once you work through it, like I'm on the tail end of it. Like I've worked through a lot of like the hate that I got earlier. And now I'm back on the road and killing it, right? But yeah, easier said than done. I'm not saying it should happen instantly. Sometimes it might take you a minute, but how do you deal with like rejection? How do you deal with like hate? How do you deal with all this stuff? You just look for the truth. And if it's true and you need to address it, address it. And if it's true and they just hate you, then set up good boundaries and move on, right? Like that's the story you should tell yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times we take rejection as again another analogy, because I'm an analogy guy, is if we're on a road trip and the road's completely closed off, dead end. The trip's canceled, go back home. When really it's just a slight detour and you have to just go around one block and continue on your path. So a lot of times, like you said, it's to help you to see where you are, take it for what it really is. So I would say that what looks like a mountain is really a grain of sand kind of thing. So, and I've had that all the time. That so often you hear that, and especially from someone you thought in your head would support you, and I'm like,
yeah, that's a tough.
But then you realize that it's a grain of salt or just a 1 block detour.
Right. Well, and I think back to this point, right, is like just doing stuff for as it really is, like not for what you think it is, but for like really like seeing things as they are, and that's really tough to do. But you like analogies. I like stories. So there's an old story of like there's an old Buddhist story of the story of the arrow, right? And I've told this before, but I think it's a beautiful story, and that is. There's always 2 stories for everything that happens. So this boy is, the boy is walking through the woods and he gets shot with an arrow, right? And there's 2 stories. There's what actually happened, which is you got shot with an arrow, right? Which can hurt and that can be painful. And then there's the other story that you try to tell yourself about why you got shot with an arrow. And that's the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is getting shot with an arrow and just realizing that it hurts and that you need to address it and get fixed. Suffering is the story that you tell yourself about why you got shot with an arrow. Sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes like the rest of the story goes, like the boy got shot with an arrow and he falls over, and all of his family rushes over and they're like, "Hey, we need to get you to a doctor. We need to get you to a doctor." And he said, "No, I'm not leaving until somebody tells me who shot me and why they shot me." And they're like, "Look, we can figure that out later. We need to get you there. We need to get you there." And eventually these questions and this fact that he wanted to know why and who shot him actually led to his death, right? Like they couldn't get him to the hospital because he wouldn't leave until he knew. And the reality is like you need to address the problem that's happening at the time, which is you got shot with an arrow, you need to get fixed. And then maybe we can figure all this out later, because sometimes it's malicious. And then we can set up really good boundaries again, right? Like set up good boundaries. Like forgiving someone doesn't mean you put yourself in a bad spot. Or you realize like, hey, maybe we were walking through something, or maybe we shouldn't have been there. Like taking accountability or setting up really good boundaries, or both. Like these things are how you succeed in life. Like sometimes bad things happen to you, and sometimes it really doesn't benefit us to figure out why it happened. Sometimes it's just we need to move and we need to execute, and then we can figure it out later if we need to figure it out later. Like I've had some bad things happen to me in my life where I'm like, oh, I didn't really need to, it just sucked. And then we move on, right? And I think that's probably one of the most important things that I've learned about life and how to just keep moving forward.
I love it. And then sometimes we figure out that because we weren't supposed to be there, we hit the tripwire that released the arrow. We caused that to ourselves because we were so focused on what we shouldn't have been focused on, or didn't need to focus on, or whatever.
Right. And so that's the point of the story, essentially, is like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I could have hit a tripwire. This dude could have tried to been killing me. I could have been at the wrong place at the wrong time. Like, it doesn't matter. Who cares? The fact is I got shot with an arrow, so I need to figure out how I can heal and get better. Right. And so sometimes people will say like, well, you need to know why, like, maybe I shouldn't have been there or whatever. Like, I'm not saying there isn't a time and place for like figuring out like why things happen to you. I'm just saying that there's a difference between pain and suffering, and pain is reacting to what actually happened, and suffering is telling yourself some story about why you think it happened to you. Right? Like God's trying to teach me a lesson, or someone hates me, or this guy hate whatever, right? Or so it does. That part isn't as important as dealing with the facts and dealing with the truth of any situation. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. The sky is falling when it's just an acorn. Just move on and get past it, and you'll figure it out later if it comes to that.
Yeah, you're like, dude, we got to get out of here. Or like, and the opposite is true for success, right? Excuse me. The opposite is true for success, which is like, hey, I made $1 million. Like, I think we should be really happy about that. And I don't think we should spend a lot of time, breaking down every step of the process to how we can do it again, because I think we just should be like, being present in the moment is good. And if you can make $1 million, you can do it again. I believe that, right? People who make $1 million and then don't again usually get inside their own head because they overanalyze it. They start writing everything down, and they're like, if I follow the exact same steps this time in this situation, it'll happen again. And when it doesn't, now we're like beating ourselves up. We're like, what happened? It happened first. It didn't happen this time. Well, every situation's different, right? So we need to take the good things that happened. We need to take the lessons that we learned, but we also need to be malleable enough to be like, totally different situation and a totally different opportunity that we need to handle as if it's that, right? Like as if we're just going to start again and kind of let go, right? Like one of my favorite books is The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F by Mark Manson. And the first chapter in that book is Don't Try. And basically he's talking about the paradox of control, which is the less control you realize you have, the more that you gain. And that the more you like let things go and not try to force things, right? It's like this old Zen principle of Wu Wei, which is like the more you just let things go and you just let things take their course and you just flow, right? The more good things happen and the more things are attracted to you, right? Like everybody knows when someone is trying to force something, right? Like you can see it. It doesn't feel good. Like if you ever watch sports, like that guy's trying too hard. He's trying to force stuff too hard. Like instead of just flowing, instead of just getting in a rhythm and going, like it's uncomfortable to watch. And that's what we need to be like in situations. It's just like, take it as it comes and go with the flow, right? Like, but then there's the joke, right? Like, I'd love to go with the flow, but what time does the flow start, kind of thing, right? Like we don't get to do all of that sometimes. You know what I'm saying? But it's the paradox of control. It's Wu Wei. It's just like letting things happen and then you just going with what happens, right? Because fighting the ocean doesn't work. You lose. But if you flow with the ocean, you get somewhere. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And then not only do you get somewhere, you usually join with people and bring others with you too, or and it makes it so much more enjoyable, much more better, and you all grow even more than you would have by yourself on that journey.
Yeah.
And
yeah, absolutely.
You have a free offer for everyone on the show. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's a 30-minute sales coach. Yeah, it's 30-minute sales coaching. If you guys, if anybody's listening and they want to learn more about sales or business development to help their business or to land their dream client, like that's what that's for, and I'd love to help.
Awesome. How do people connect with you to learn more, to get on that call?
Yeah, you got my website up there, Dalton K. Jensen. My email's dalton@daltonkjensen.com. Feel free to email me, or I'm on pretty much all social media at Dalton K. Jensen. Wherever I have my middle name is unique, so I get all of the social media handles. So Dalton K. Jensen, wherever on social media you can find me.
Awesome. And we've talked on numerous occasions and stuff, and it's always been uplifting and educational and motivational as well. And I've never regretted a minute of it.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, bro.
So, and let's talk about your podcast for a minute. What's your podcast?
Sure. Yeah. My podcast is called The Thinking Project. It's where I interview business owners and creatives to help people start on their journey of making their passions a reality. Right. So, and then also a big part of my podcast is to like introduce new opportunities to make money to people. Um, because I think we can all, I think everybody, I think it's very possible for everybody to make an extra $500 to $1,000 a month. And if that would change your life, then the podcast is where you should be.
Absolutely. And you can also learn more about that on the website as well. And
Yes,
a lot
sir.
of great info. You got any big announcements or big exciting things going on for 2023 in your podcast?
Oh, in the podcast, no, we're just going to keep plugging along. Hopefully, get some really cool guests. Hopefully, get some, bigger guests. But otherwise, we're just going to have a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And it is so much fun. For
Absolutely.
those that haven't started a podcast, I recommend it because there's so many connections that you make. If nothing else, just the
Right.
connections and the experience and
The
the
networking.
growth built into it. The mentors that you don't call mentors at the time, like you talked about earlier and stuff. And I learn more from my
Yeah.
guests than I put out most of the time. So
Well, it's great though. It's beautiful to go through it all. So I appreciate you letting me be here, boss.
So no, and I appreciate you being on, and thank you so much for taking the time and sharing some nuggets of wisdom.
Of course.
And just keep doing what you're doing. I'm sure we'll be back on the show with you at a future date and updates and progress and all that stuff. And everyone listening, thank you for being here. Thank you for the comments. And as always, remember to live your passion, fulfill your purpose, and explore those possibilities. We'll see you next